I was born in New Orleans. I'm an only child, and I have a whole slew of cousins, but no siblings of my own. Went to grammar school in New Orleans at A.H. Wilson School, then on to McMain Junior High, and I went to De La Salle for high school. It was a very big high school. There was over 1,000 students. I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. Well, to be a neurosurgeon, before you really finished, you're in your late 30s. And one of the things I realized was that, you know, even if you go to school that long, there are certain things that are presented to you in a surgical setting that you can't do anything. You can't help people. And I knew I was not going to be good with that. So that's when I started thinking, you know, maybe I need to think about a different career. And that's eventually what took me to law school. Well, initially I thought I was going to go to Tulane, but a whole bunch of my friends were coming to LSU, and I realized if I was going to stay at Tulane, I was going to end up having to live at home, and I was not interested in doing that at that time. So that's what brought me to LSU. I knew that I was going to go to law school, and it was clear to me that because of my age, I was going to be draft eligible, and they had a lottery, and so it literally, you didn't know, you know, if you were number 300, you probably weren't going to get drafted, but if you were number 10, you were definitely going to get drafted. So when I started LSU, ROTC was still mandatory for freshmen and sophomores. So after my second year, I elected to go advanced ROTC in the Air Force, knowing that when I finished, I'd be commissioned as a second lieutenant and likely could get an educational deferment for law school. So that's what I did. I owed the Air Force 4 years. And so I had gotten some orders. I was going to go to Denver for training. And literally, my house was packed up and I was ready to go. And I got notice not to leave, that the orders were changed. And that's when I got the notice I was going to be at England Air Force Base for 90 days, and then in the reserve after that. But I had clerked with one of my former fraternity brothers, a fellow by the name of David Kiesel, who still practices here. He's a patent lawyer. And another fellow, Vic Roy, who has since died, who was a real estate lawyer. And I had clerked for them for the last 2 years in law school. And so I went to them and I said, look, I'm not going. I'd like to stay. And they were amenable to that. And so I practiced there with them for 12, 13 years or so. More and more of what I was doing was defending businesses in business disputes, and that kind of ultimately led to doing what I really did for the lion's share of my career, which was professional malpractice defense work. I was first with the firm. It was ultimately called Roy, Kiesel & Patterson, and I was there for about 13 years. I was ready for a move around that time. It was difficult because I wanted to develop the trial stuff, and my partners were not in that area, so I needed to do something else. Joe Jubin and I had been friends. We were in Kiwanis together and gotten to be personal friends through that. And so he had a firm, and they had several people there that did trial work. So I approached him. That ultimately worked out. And so I went over there with that firm for about 4 or 5 years. Then Chris Kirkpatrick approached both of us and told us that Senator Long, Russell Long, was going to retire from the Senate and was going to have an office in Washington and an office in Baton Rouge. And they wanted to staff up the office in Baton Rouge. Would Joe and I be interested in joining and, forming the firm. And so that's what we did. In 1988, we formed Long Law Firm, and here we are today. I met, Christine was a law clerk in our office when I was with Roy Kiesel and Patterson in the early 1980s. And she went on to practice at Brazil, Saxe and Wilson for a number of years, doing a lot of the same kind of work that I do. And several years later, I was divorced from my first wife. We started going out. We went out for about 3 or 4 years and ultimately got married and have been married ever since. And I've said this in other forums, and it's true, to a large measure, whatever success I've had as a lawyer is attributable to her. And so I participated in some mediations, both as a mediator and as an advocate in mediation. And at that point, I realized I needed to educate myself more about the process so I could be more effective in doing it. I wasn't really thinking that much at that time about being a mediator, but of being a good advocate for our clients. So I looked around, and Pepperdine offered a program that I thought was attractive for practitioners because obviously I couldn't take a year off and go to school, but I could go a week or two here and there. And so I started out there, not really with the intention of getting the academic degree, but just picking courses that I thought would be helpful. But it was so good, and it was so interesting, and the faculty was so dynamic in the way they taught that I did elect to go ahead and do it. And so over the course of about 7.5 years, I got the LLM, and that sort of took me into being a mediator avenue. About 8 or 9 years ago, a group of us, about 5 or 6 of us, got together and we formed what was called Patterson Resolution Group. We tried to focus our work on, as we advertise it, complex mediation and arbitration. And so what the message was is, if you have problems that are large, that have multiple layers, like a big construction dispute with multiple parties, those are the kinds of cases we tried to offer to potential lawyers. I've been a bar junkie for pretty much my entire professional life. And so, I was first very active in the Baton Rouge bar, held all the major offices, and then ultimately was the president of the Baton Rouge bar in 1984, 1985. Then, through encouragement by other people, started to get involved in state bar activities, served on a lot of committees, served on the Bar Foundation, was involved early on as a grader for the bar exam for the Committee on Bar Admissions, ultimately became an examiner. After that, did what's called character and fitness, which is review of applicants who may or may not have problem background issues. We would do the research on that, and if we took the position that the court shouldn't admit them, I would go argue those cases at the Louisiana Supreme Court. Now it's done totally differently. They have a significant staff, but it was a much leaner operation back then. And then ultimately I was the chairman of the committee for a number of years, which was an interesting experience because every time I was the chair when we gave the bar exam, somebody sued me. Became president of the state bar 2010 and served 2010 and 11, which was, was just an unbelievably rewarding and experience. I was in Washington, D.C. for the annual support for pro bono services nationwide. And so the way it works is the current president and then the president-elect of all 50 states go to Washington and they lobby their congressional group. And so the first morning we were there, the first appointment we had in the morning was Senator Vitter's office. And we were sitting there and we were waiting for Senator Vitter, and I'm looking up and I can see this oil rig on fire. And I'm thinking to myself, boy, that looks like a bad fire. I hope nobody got hurt. Well, by the end of the day, we knew that there were 11 people that were in fact killed, and we had that catastrophic oil spill which lasted for upwards of 3 months and polluted the Gulf of Mexico significantly, caused all kinds of problems. And so that was the headache that I got dealt going into my term as bar president. And it was, in many respects, there were a lot of challenges about that, as how to try to help people, how to get relief to people who had been displaced because of their jobs. There was, it didn't, to the rest of the world, it didn't look like that big of a deal, but to the impacted areas, it was a nightmare, particularly the people in the seafood industry, which it killed them for years. We represented Ethel against Energy in a real interesting case where Energy had required Ethel to put a dedicated line to one of their plants at very high cost, millions of dollars. And ultimately, Energy felt like that they needed to, Ethel needed to spend more to improve it. By happenstance, they hired an expert, and at that point, they then realized that they shouldn't have had the expense in the first instance. The case was in another firm at that time. It bumbled around for 15 plus years. We got hired. We ultimately tried the case. It was a jury case in front of Judge Kay Bates. At that time, it was the largest verdict in her court to date, which it was, with interest, it was right at $8 million. So the client was real happy, and it was really a great experience for the firm because a lot of people worked on it, and it was interesting experts, lots of interesting stuff. So that's one that sticks in my mind. I've been teaching a trial skill course at the law school with my buddy Ed Walters for going on 30 years, and he and I still get excited about it. Every year we'll be teaching this coming spring, and it's a good thing for us old guys to have the opportunity to see what these young people are like, and to try to give them some tools that they're going to eventually need. So yeah, that's a real big piece of my existence, if you will. I really enjoy doing it, and I think we're giving our students something that's valuable. Well, I hope people will say that he did the best he could for his clients and was a good law partner and a good teacher. And I think those would be the things that I would say if I was writing it.